So the title of my talk is Hamsters, Parrots, and Snakes, Oh My, Using Evolutionary Relationship to Guide Categorical Inferences. This is work that I'm doing in collaboration with Kevin Catley, who used to be on the faculty at Vanderbilt. He's now at Western Carolina University. And he's an evolutionary biologist by training, a science educator, and also Dan Funk, who's in the biology department here. So 2009 was really a momentous year for me. I got a new range. It came with a self-cleaning oven, and it was the first time in my life that I've owned a self-cleaning oven, which means I now actually have a clean oven in my house. And like any good new appliance owner, I actually read the instruction manual that came with it to learn how to use my oven. And as I read through this booklet, I then got a little bit concerned because there's a warning in there. It says, important, the health of some birds is extremely sensitive to the fumes given off during the self-cleaning cycle of any range. Move birds to another well-ventilated room. We started without you, which maybe explains what happened to the parrot in the Monty Python sketch. Now, fortunately, I don't have any pet birds in my house, and my colleagues don't have any pet birds in their houses, but it raises this warning raises the question of, well, given that these fumes are harmful to the health of birds, are they also harmful to any other pets that you might have? And in my house, I have a pet king snake, or actually, more accurately, my son has a pet king snake, but my son is off at college, so I have a pet king snake. And lots of people have pet hamsters or other small mammals that live in cages so that are not roaming all over the house. And so, do owners of snakes, owners of these small rodents, do they also have to worry about the fumes from the self-cleaning oven? And you can imagine a variety of bases that you could use for answering this question. So one possible basis for making an inference is similarity. So you might argue that, well, hamsters are warm-blooded like birds, and in contrast, snakes don't seem to share any obvious similarities with birds. So maybe the owner of the hamster ought to worry about the fumes from the self-cleaning oven, but the snake owner doesn't have to worry. A second basis for inference is category membership. So you might say, well, the hamster is a mammal like people, and obviously people don't have to worry about the fumes from this oven, or you wouldn't be able to buy this oven and put it in your house in the first place. So the hamster owner clearly doesn't have to worry. And maybe not the snake owner either, because snakes aren't mammals and they're not birds. If you look at the literature on categorical inferences, you see there are a variety of factors that affect the inferences that people make, including the typicality of the category members and the expertise of the people making the inferences, and I'll come back to those later. And then finally, a third basis for making an inference that I'm going to spend some more time talking about is something that evolutionary biologists refer to as tree thinking. So it's using information about evolutionary relationship that's depicted in evolutionary or phylogenetic trees. So here's an example of a phylogenetic tree, in particular what's called a cladogram. So this cladogram shows that birds and crocodilians, so crocodiles and alligators and whatever, that birds and crocodilians are more closely related to each other than they are to any of the other taxa on this diagram. And the evidence for this close relationship between birds and crocodilians is that these two taxa share a most recent common ancestor that would be located right here. This bird-crocodile grouping is referred to as a clade, which is where the term cladogram comes from. And you can see that similarly, snakes and lizards are more closely related to each other than they are to any of the other taxa on the diagram. And lizards and snakes are a clade also. These clades are nested, so lizards and snakes and crocodilians and birds also constitute a clade, and the evidence for their relationship is their most recent common ancestor marked by this line here. And you can see from these nested levels of most recent common ancestry that birds and snakes are more closely related to each other than birds and mammals, because the most recent common ancestor for birds and mammals is down here one level. So from this perspective on inferences, the snake owner has more to worry from the fact that birds are sensitive to the fumes from the self-cleaning oven. The snake owner has more to worry about than the hamster owner, because snakes are more closely related evolutionarily to birds than hamsters are. Nobody died. I should say, well, I mean, actually, so the reason why I was interested in this nice king snake actually shares the counter with this self-cleaning oven. And we moved the snake before we ran the oven, just in case. So as a cognitive psychologist, I've been interested in students' understanding of these evolutionary diagrams for a number of years now. And one of the things that first drew me to being interested in these diagrams is the fact that they're typically depicted in either of two isomorphic, informationally equivalent formats. So the top format, this is the tree format, so this shows that mammals and reptiles are more closely related to each other than either is to amphibians. This latter format down here represents exactly the same information, that mammals and reptiles are more closely related to each other than either one is to amphibians. Despite the fact that these two diagrams are informationally equivalent, we found in our previous work, that I've talked about some of that in this forum the last couple of years, we found that the latter format is much more difficult for students to understand than the tree format. And we found this in a couple of different studies using a variety of different tasks. So we've used a task where students had to translate from one format to another, cladograms involving 5 or 6 taxa. We've also done a study where students were given cladograms with 7 to 10 taxa, and they had to answer comprehension and reasoning questions. And students do much worse on these tasks when you present the information in the latter format. And in particular, we had one study where we asked an inference question. So given that termites digest cellulose, what other taxon on the diagram is most likely to also digest cellulose? And we found that the subjects were correct on average about 50% of the time, which is way above chance, because there are 10 taxa on this diagram, but if this is your exam in your evolution class, you just failed your exam. We ask them, even when they get the correct answer, and we ask them why they gave that answer, what evidence supports their reasoning, and only 28% of subjects refer to the fact that the taxon that they selected shares a most recent common ancestor with the termite. So we started thinking about, well, why are subjects doing so badly on this inference question? And there are a couple of reasons. I mean, one reason could be they're just bad at inference. But there are a couple other more interesting reasons. So one possibility is that the cladograms that we gave to subjects in this inference study were large, so they had 10 taxa. They were topologically, structurally complex. We asked a very open-ended question, given that this taxon digests cellulose, which other one might? You've got 10 you could choose from. There were characters on these cladograms. They were told that certain taxa have this character, other taxa have that character. These characters were necessary for answering some of the other questions in the study. They were completely irrelevant for answering the inference question. So maybe this was distracting information. There's actually evidence that they used this information and they got the wrong answer using it. So maybe that was contributing to the poor performance. And in contrast, there's a huge literature on category-based inferences in the cognitive science literature that uses very different kinds of paradigms and tasks to ask a very similar kind of question. So in the cognitive in the cognitive science studies of categorical inferences, subjects' attention is focused on a small number of items, a small amount of information, like 2 or 3 categories typically. And the questions that the subjects are asked are very closed-ended kinds of questions. So you're told that category B has some property, and you make a numerical estimate of the likelihood that some particular category A also has this property. Or maybe you're told that A has one property and B has another property, so tell me, what about C? Does it have the property of A or the property of B? So maybe students would do better with our tree thinking kinds of inferences if they were given a more cognitive sciencey type of task. So these kinds of considerations and some others led us to have 4 goals for the studies I'm going to tell you about. The first goal was to try to bring tree thinking inference research more in line with the cognitive science research on inferences. A second goal of the research was to determine the conditions under which students can use information about evolutionary relationship that we give them to override faulty knowledge that they might have. So one of the benefits of having information about evolutionary relationship, about having these cladograms, is they provide an external standard for what's the right answer. So what are the conditions under which students can use this information to override faulty folk biological knowledge? A third goal was to provide a better, stronger, clearer test of cladogram format effects with respect to categorical inferences. So one possibility is, I said our subjects did pretty badly on our inference problems, but they were very large, topologically complex cladograms. In this study, we used the simplest cladograms possible. So like the example tree and ladder that I gave you, it shows that mammals and reptiles are more closely related to each other than either of them is to amphibians. You just are told about hierarchical relationship among 3 taxa. It's the simplest possible hierarchical relationship you can have. And we will look for whether there are still differences between the tree and ladder format with those very, very simple cladograms. And then the final goal was to determine how students understand and reason from cladograms as a basis for informing decisions about how to introduce tree thinking into biology curricula, which there have been a lot of calls recently for putting this into undergraduate classes, high school classes, maybe even middle school classes, but nobody really knows how to do it because nobody's done any research on it much. So here's an example of our inference problem. This is in the baseline conditions. So subjects are told, for example, the cottontail rabbit uses enzyme X to help regulate cell function. The marbled salamander uses enzyme Y. So consider the rough green snake. Does it use the same enzyme as the cottontail rabbit, in which case circle a number on this rating scale? Or does it use the enzyme of the marbled salamander, in which case circle a number on the scale over here? So this is except for maybe our pretty colored pictures, is a very typical cognitive science categorical inference task. It should provide a way of telling us about subjects' naive folk biological knowledge. What are they, in the absence of any specific information that we give them, do they think that snakes belong with mammals, or do they think that snakes belong with amphibians? And we can then compare performance on this kind of problem to performance when we give them the cladogram, which provides an external standard for what should be the correct answer. So we did this across the 3 studies I'm going to tell you about with 3 different kinds of inference triads, so which are labeled, named by the taxon about which somebody's making an inference. So the example I just showed you was a reptile triad. We also had fungus triads and bird triads. And all of these triads were developed with the expectation that in the baseline condition, subjects would make a naive inference based on their folk biological knowledge that would be inconsistent with or contradicting information about evolutionary relationships. So in this case, we expect in the baseline condition, subjects will say the snake uses the same enzyme as the salamander, as the amphibian, but in fact, snakes are more closely related to rabbits. Here we expect in the baseline condition, subjects will say the mushroom is more likely to have the same enzyme as the geranium, as the small plant. In fact, mushrooms are more closely related to animals. And then my bird case, we talked about this. We expect that subjects will say that the bird uses the same enzyme as the other warm-blooded critter here, the mammal, when in fact they're more closely related to snakes. So there's a dichotomy, then a divergence between what we expect their naive inference to be and what the correct evolution-based inference is. So across these studies, we ran subjects in 3 different conditions. So the baseline condition, I showed you that already. They just get the inference problem. They get no information about evolutionary relationship. In the tree cladogram condition, immediately above this inference question, they get the appropriate information about evolutionary relationships. They get it in the tree format. And then in the ladder condition, they get the cladogram, but they get it in the ladder format. So I'm going to tell you about 3 experiments. The first experiment used college students who had either weaker or stronger backgrounds in biology, which I'll define. In the second experiment, we looked at stronger background college students who we tested before and after they were taught phylogenetics, which is basically how to read and understand these evolutionary trees. And then in the third experiment, we tested 10th graders in their biology class. So experiment 1, we have 54 weaker background, 54 stronger background subjects. The criterion to get into the stronger background group is that students had taken both BioSci 110A and 110B, which are it's the 2-semester introductory biology course for biology majors and pre-med majors and any other serious science students. The weaker background students had not taken both of those courses. We had a list of courses they could check off what they had taken, and if you look at, on average, how much had they taken, the stronger background students had taken, on average, 3.3 semesters of potentially relevant coursework. The weaker background students had taken just under half a semester. So we had something like a 7-to-1 difference in coursework between these 2 groups. So that, obviously, that's between subjects. The 3 diagram conditions, baseline, ladder, and tree, are also between subjects. Subjects completed an inference booklet that had 50 inference problems, like the ones I showed you. There were 8 reptile problems. We manipulated, this is all within subjects, whether the amphibian was a frog or a salamander, and we manipulated whether the reptile lives on land or in water. We had 10 fungus trials, 2 for each of 5 types of animals: primate, large carnivore, reptile, fish, and invertebrate. And then we had 32 filler trials that used a variety of different animals and plants that basically served to disguise all these manipulations that we had. Oh yeah, one final preliminary. So to score the data, what we did is subjects made the correct inference. So in this case, to the cottontail rabbit, we took their rating and we scored it from +1 to +5. If they made the incorrect inference, so to the marbled salamander here, then we scored their response from -1 to -5. So we have a scale then that goes from -5 to +5 and got means. So a mean of 0 means that they were equally likely to pick one or the other. Yes? In the baseline condition, they're just told, they're given the information, and they said, which enzyme do you think this snake is most likely to use? In the cladogram conditions, they're told at the top of the page, whatever it said there, the following diagram shows the evolutionary relationships among mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. And then they're told, scientists have determined that the rabbit uses this enzyme, and then they're again asked, what enzyme does the snake use? So they're not explicitly told to use information about evolutionary relationship. Can
they freely refer to that diagram?
Yeah, it's right there at the top of the page. Yeah, it's all in each So you have this problem and you have that problem, and the information is right there at the top of the page. They do, in fact, pay attention to it, but we didn't tell them specifically to. Okay, so results for the reptile triad. So we have weaker and stronger biology background subjects. The brown bars are the no diagram baseline condition. Purple's the ladder. Green is the tree. So we have significant effects of diagram condition of biology background and a significant interaction between diagram condition and biology background. So that's what I want to focus on. You can see in the no diagram baseline condition, subjects, both the weaker and the stronger background subjects, systematically and very strongly make the wrong inference. They are just quite sure that the reptile uses the same enzyme as the amphibian. If you present the evolutionary relationships in the ladder format, that has absolutely no effect on the inferences for the weaker background students. It does for the stronger background students. They do much better, although notice that they still get the wrong answer because these are negative. This mean is negative. And you give the tree cladogram. The weaker background students are now at chance. The stronger background students do finally switch and make the correct inference. I will note, though, that the strength of this inference in the tree condition is less than the strength of the inference here in the baseline condition. Yeah, Isabel.
You may have said this, but in their courses on this, would they be more likely to get the trees, what they see and what they're used to?
So I'm not sure exactly what they get in their courses because they've taken a variety of courses. I do know that textbooks have both trees and ladders, and they're more likely to have ladders than to have trees. So if anything, they would be more likely to have seen the ladder format than to have seen the tree format. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you kind of making up these facts about the enzymes?
The enzymes are a random two-letter code followed by a random two digits.
But is it likely to be true, though, that
Enzymes are inherited. So yes, it's likely that enzymes would be shared due to closeness of evolutionary relationship. So these enzyme names are completely made up, but this is the kind of property for which this kind of inference would be warranted. That's why we picked enzymes. Thank you.
So did you intentionally put our pit sort of default semantic similarity against the tree?
We picked on purpose inference problems for which we expected they're going to get the wrong answer in the baseline condition. Otherwise, we have no way of knowing whether they understand the cladogram and that affects their performance. We have to see a change. Yeah, but if I have to bet on something, this is a safer bet to make. But you're right. We could have, if we found something they knew nothing about, then we would get a change from 0, and that presumably would have worked too. I'm not going to dwell on this because I think I'm going to run out of time given the questions, but I'll just note briefly that we also found significant effects of the particular taxon. So it mattered whether the amphibian was a salamander or a frog. It mattered whether the reptile lived on water or land, which potentially makes sense in the baseline condition, but shouldn't happen in the cladogram conditions. And these are all main effects. They don't interact with the cladogram condition. The fungus triads, I will go through this quickly. You see exactly the same pattern of results. In general, they did a little bit better, but you see the same effects of diagram condition, of biology background, and the same pattern of interaction. So there's no difference between stronger and weaker in the baseline condition. Only the stronger improve with the ladder, although they're still below 0. And you don't get good performance until you have both stronger background and the tree cladogram. So let me just briefly focus on the results for the stronger background students here. So I said on average they had taken just over 3 biology courses. Nevertheless, their mean performance in the latter condition was below 0. So they, even when they were given the evolutionary relationships, they weren't able to use them. And in the tree condition, their mean was above 0, but it was way below ceiling. This was a 5-point scale. If you average across the reptile and the fungus triads, their mean in the tree condition is 1.95. So yeah, they're going with the information in the cladogram, but they're not really highly convinced about that. And the inferences often depended on the type of taxa, which they shouldn't. So this suggests that the cladogram, although it should be seen as a authoritative source of information, the subjects clearly didn't view it that way. So that led us to the second experiment. We tested students who were currently enrolled in Biosci 205, which is the evolution class here. They were tested twice during the semester. They were tested once basically at midterm, right before they were taught phylogenetics in the class, and then they were tested again at the end of the semester, approximately 5 or 6 weeks later. And they got either the ladder cladogram booklet or the tree cladogram booklet. So reptile results, we found a main effective instruction, which is, pretty nice for the instructor of the class. So, so we have, again, just the ladder condition and the tree condition. So before instruction, subjects did worse. After instruction, they did better. A main effective cladogram format, so subjects did better with the tree cladogram than they did with the ladder cladogram. Although the difference between the tree and ladder formats is smaller after instruction than it was before instruction, that did not turn out to be a significant interaction. The trends, what you might expect, but even still, there is a significant difference here. Even after instruction, they did better with the trees. And I'm going to skip the taxon effects. The fungus results, you see the similar kind of pattern, so a main effective instruction, a main effective cladogram format. Here, the interaction was significant. So this is a significantly smaller difference after instruction than it was before instruction. But even still, you see that after instruction, the subjects remained better in the tree condition than in the ladder condition.
They're only getting instruction on trees from ladders, I mean,
Sorry, I didn't say anything about the instruction. So they're given 2 days of instruction on how do you understand these diagrams. They are shown both trees and ladders, and they are and the 3 taxon version, and they are told that these are identical, equivalent representations. They are not directly walked through exactly how to map them on, but they are at least shown, the 2 of them, on the screen at the same time, and are told that these are equivalent. So in this experiment, we found that the subjects did better with the tree cladograms than with the ladder cladograms, just like we found in experiment 1. This was despite the fact that these students, that some of these results were after the students had been taught phylogenetics in their class, and despite the fact that we gave the simplest cladograms possible. So it's not that, you give this large, complicated ladder and students can't understand it, but if you just went down to the simplest possible, they would get that. But no, they don't even get the structure even when it's the simplest possible. All right, I'm going to switch gears for just a little bit. In experiment 3, we ran high school students. So I said earlier in the talk that there have been a bunch of calls recently in the science education literature to introduce tree thinking into biology curricula, into the college curriculum, into high school curriculum, maybe into middle school curriculum. There are a few studies in the literature of tree thinking in college students. To our knowledge, nobody has looked at this in high school students at all. And you're not going to put this in classrooms unless you have some sense of what the high school kids can do. So we ran high school students in this study. A second purpose of this study was to test a possible alternative explanation for the poor performance in the baseline condition in experiment 1. So subjects got the wrong answer, and I was arguing that they got the wrong answer because their folk biological knowledge tells them that reptiles and amphibians go together and tells them that mushrooms and plants go together. But maybe that's not what's going on. Maybe those results simply reflect a bias to keep animals, and particularly mammals, separate. So animals are special, mammals especially are special because we're mammals. So maybe the results are not really because they think reptiles belong with amphibians or mushrooms belong with plants, but just that the animals need to be something separate, and especially the mammals need to be something separate. And so to test this alternative hypothesis, we added the bird triads in this experiment, because in the bird triads now, the correct answer is to put the bird with the rest of the reptiles, to put the bird with the snake. So if you have a bias to keep the animals, keep the mammals separate, then that's going to give you the correct answer in the baseline condition for these triads, even though it's giving you the wrong answer for the others. So this will allow us to discriminate whether the performance in the baseline condition is really telling us about underlying folk biological categories or whether it's just simple response bias, which still might be interesting but is something different. So again, we ran 10th graders. This was in North Carolina where Kevin is, and they teach the introductory biology class in 10th grade in those schools, so we were recruiting 10th graders out of their biology class. We only used the baseline and tree cladogram conditions. We figured that if the college students can't understand the ladder cladograms, certainly the high school students can't understand them, and there's no point in wasting subjects on that. We also made the inference booklet smaller because our high school teacher consultant said that the students weren't going to sit through 50 inference problems. So we cut it down to 24. So there were 12 filler triads, and then there were 4 reptile triads. We manipulated whether the reptiles belong to the group Diapsida, which is snakes and lizards and birds and crocodiles, but we only used snakes and lizards, or Testudines, which is turtles and tortoises and terrapins. There was some suggestion in experiment 1 that our subjects responded differently to the one turtle trial we had compared to the others, so we manipulated that here. We had 4 fungus trials. We manipulated whether the animal was an invertebrate or a large carnivore. We expected animal differences in experiment 1. They were not significant, but there was at least a trend for differences in performance for these 2, and so we were checking that out. And then for the bird triads, we manipulated the typicality of the bird. So we have robins and blue jays, and we have flamingos and ostriches. And then the final change that we made for the high school students is that we simplified the question by breaking it into 2 parts. So we asked the high school students first, which enzyme do you think helps regulate cell function in the flamingo? And they picked either chipmunk or emerald tree boa, and then we asked them separately for the rating. We ended up then, for analysis purposes, so that we would have a consistent scale across our 3 experiments, that we recoded these 2 responses into a -1 to -5 scale for incorrect inferences and +1 to +5 for correct inferences. Okay, bird results. So we have a main effect of diagram condition. The subjects did much better when they were given the tree cladogram than when they were answering in the baseline condition with no information about evolutionary relationship. We have a significant effect of typicality, so subjects did better with the typical birds than the typical ones. So they were happier about putting the flamingo and the ostrich with the snake and the crocodile than they were putting the robin and the blue jay with the snake and the crocodile. In terms of the alternative hypothesis, were people doing badly on the reptile and fungus triads in the first experiment because of this bias to keep animals separate, which would make them do well with these bird triads? If you look just at accuracy, so forget the ratings, so you just look at did they pick the correct answer in the baseline condition, they picked the correct answer for the bird problems 33% of the time, for the fungus problems 19%, for the reptile problems 9%. So in fact, they did do better with the bird triads than they did with the other two, but chance is 50% correct, and that's significantly below chance. So they are still systematically making the wrong inference in the baseline condition even here. So this argues against this general bias of I'm just going to keep the animals separate. You see a similar pattern with the reptile triads. So a main effective diagram condition, they do better with the tree than with no diagram. Significant effective type of taxon, they did better when the reptile was a turtle or a tortoise than when it was a snake or a lizard. There aren't really, really good typicality norms for reptiles the way they are for birds, but I think this is really the same kind of typicality effect. What data there is suggests that snakes and lizards are very highly typical. Reptiles and turtles and tortoises are not. And then finally, the fungus results. We see the same pattern of performance. The subjects did better with the tree cladogram than with no diagram. They did better with the invertebrates. So this was a cockroach and a banana slug, I believe, than with the large carnivores, which was a lion and a jackal. And again, I think this is also probably a typicality effect, although to my knowledge, there are no typicality norms for animal. But I imagine if you got a bunch of people and asked them to rate typicality or just list animals, lions and tigers and bears are going to come up pretty high in the ordering, and cockroach and banana slug are probably not going to be there particularly. So this effect here replicates the non-significant trend that we found in experiment 1 that we were predicting there. Yes?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you just describe what a triad again would look like for the carnivores? So the target item is the fungus, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's going to be, all right, I'll just do it here. So this is a mushroom,
Yeah.
and this is a small plant, like this is the plant, this is a geranium, and so this is a mushroom, this is a geranium, and this is a cockroach.
Cockroach?
Or a carnivore, this is a lion.
Okay.
Sorry.
And so a mushroom is more similar
A mushroom is more closely evolutionarily more closely related to a lion than it is to a plant.
that does contradict my
Exactly. Yeah. All fungi. So mushrooms and molds and yeasts and whatever else is in that big group of fungi, they're all more closely related to animals.
So should vegetarians worry about eating mushrooms then?
I don't know, maybe. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the results of experiment 3 with the 10th graders replicate the results that we got in experiment 1, and especially the results with the weaker background students. So the subject said that the reptiles belong with the amphibians, actually stronger too for that. Reptiles belong with the amphibians and the mushrooms belong with the plants, and then new to this, the birds belong with the mammals. And it makes us wonder, I mean, granted, well, maybe there's not that much difference between our probably sophomores and juniors and the 10th graders, but it makes us wonder, at what age students are learning this incorrect knowledge. Are they learning it in school, or are they learning this just from, as preschool students when they're just out and about and observing the environment?
I mean, one thing that's a little tricky, I can't remember what are the birds, I mean, there's a typicality issue here, right? That,
Yep.
I mean, it just could be surface features. Reptiles look more like amphibians.
Well, so
Look more like plants, and in particular, yeah, so anyways, I feel like it could just be a mere, I mean, I don't know how to, I hate to use the word mere, but it might just be a
well,
surface similarity.
there are certainly similarity effects in there. I think that's why with the reptile triads in experiment 1, the subjects more strongly make the incorrect inference when the amphibian is a salamander. So they're more likely to put the reptiles with the salamander, and they're somewhat less likely with the frog.
So what's the contrast, the reptile versus a bird?
So in the bird triads,
No, I'm sorry, the reptile. What's the correct choice again in your
the
reptile?
mammals.
Mammals, yeah. So I mean, like, essentially what I'm saying is I bet you'd get this effect of 3-year-olds.
So they're clearly some really superficial similarity effects in here, at least explaining part of this, which then would argue that, yeah, this is, really little. You might
get it younger, but I just don't think you can test it.
you can
You probably don't want to.
right. I mean, but it is the case that kids aren't completely relying on similarity to make inferences. So even for
Information, right? They'll use labels.
right, Susan Gelman showed that even 4-year-olds will make categorical inferences in the face, pitted against superficial similarities. So, but yeah, there is similarity going on here. I don't think that's everything, and it's harder to explain the bird triads that way because, maybe the birds have some kind of fuzzy covering on their body, and mammals have some kind of fuzzy covering on their body, and birds it happens to be feathers, and mammals it's fur, and the reptiles look like they have continuous skin, right? The scales probably don't look like fuzzy body covering. So maybe, but that's a kind of high-level superficial similarity if you're saying the feathers are like the fur, because they don't really, feathers and fur don't really look anything alike. So
Because the problem with like the mushroom thing, that's just their basic inanimate.
that's probably, and the mushrooms grow in the ground and they don't move.
Boy, I find it shocking.
Yeah.
They're in, they don't.
Yeah, no, it's
Maybe you're right, not inanimate objects, like your distinction between.
yeah, no, it's very interesting.
Oh, no, they don't.
Yeah.
So there must have been some evolution in thinking about evolution over the last 100 years. And could it be the case that, like, say, when people of my generation went to school, we were taught these kinds of similarities, that birds were more like mammals than were like reptiles, for the reasons that seemed like good reasons at the time, and since then.
Well, so partly subjects get this one wrong because reptiles and amphibians are considered together. There's the field of herpetology, and it's the study of reptiles and amphibians, and that's an incoherent group. So even biologists, and that's
How did that come about?
that came about from really old classification where they were thought to be very similar. There are superficial similarities that then they don't have fur and whatever, and so that classification of putting reptiles and amphibians together still in biology is probably a holdover from that. In terms of people's understanding, it's in some sense shocking the number of undergraduates who don't know the difference between a reptile and an amphibian. So they'll see a snake and they'll call it an amphibian. They'll see a turtle and a box turtle and they'll call it an amphibian. Or they'll see a salamander or a frog and they'll call it a reptile.
Right, so your task depends on the fact that they make the correct inference from the specific animal to the category, right? So your tree diagram
Well,
wouldn't help if you didn't
yes and no, and
classify it.
yeah, but we created all our pages, all our stimuli, so that the labels all line up in space. And all the filler trials, and basically all the trials except for possibly the reptiles and the amphibians, they would all know this, and it would be unambiguous.
That's the only one.
So they would know from all the rest of the trials that everything lines up. This is other data, not from this study, that I know that they call turtles amphibians, and they call salamanders reptiles and whatever. That's not from this study where we gave the labels. Okay, I'm going to actually maybe get to my conclusions. Yes?
Did you have the pictures there? Did you put the pictures for us? Did you have the pictures?
No. I showed you exactly what the subject saw. Those were the stimuli.
Why do you show them the pictures?
Because it ups the similarity.
Well, we showed the pictures for a couple of reasons. I mean, it gives them an opportunity to use similarity for sure, but it's also the only way to do the study in some sense, because otherwise you're constrained by what are the list of things that undergraduates know, and that will get rid of at least 50% of our stimuli and maybe more. Yeah, I'm sure that half of our stimuli, maybe half is too much, but it is really shocking what they don't know what things are. They know, yeah, they don't know what any kind of mushrooms are, right? One mushroom name would be the same as another mushroom name. Most of the plants, they don't know what those names are. If they see it, they'll see, oh yeah, that's a plant. But no, but if I say, what's one that I used? There aren't enough plants that,
Why is it bad to say geranium?
I can't say geranium for every trial.
Go ahead.
The reason I'm asking this is, yes, on the one hand it does, bias people towards similarity, but on the other hand too, it seems like what you're saying is you're giving them information there. The information is irrelevant, but from the subject's perspective, you have a diagram there, and then you have these pictures that are giving them information, and they're trying to use it. They're looking at the similarity of these pictures because they're there.
Sure, but so.
They might be more likely to use it is irrelevant information, but you are using it.
Well, right, and if I don't show them the picture, at least if they know what these things are. If I say lion, or I say, well, I probably can't say any particular kind of snake. They know what none of the snakes look like. But yeah, but so if I give the name and they actually know what it is, or more or less what it is, they're presumably going to call to mind what it, right? I mean, they know what salamanders look like. They know what snakes look like. They know what lions look like. But the other part of this is that ultimately the point is that you should be able to use, with appropriate instruction, which obviously these kids don't have, but you should learn that there are what objects look like, and that what these animals, plants look like is not a reliable cue, and that evolutionary relationship is a reliable cue. And so we're looking at this point at what is sort of baseline performance. What can these students do before they've been taught anything, and therefore what are the challenges that we're going to have to overcome when we go to teach people this. So this superficial similarity that you can see in the pictures are in their textbook, the pictures are, they see animals out in the world, they have pets in their classroom. They're going to have to learn that this is information that is not reliable information, that they're going to have to override, and the results here provide one window into how strong are those kinds of biases.
And it's also just a strong
Right.
that they're relevant.
And they're not, and they have to, no, they're not, and they have to learn that they're not. And
Well, but they are.
But-
They are, because you have to look at you have a name of a mushroom that's some word you've never seen before, and then there's this picture that you go, oh, it's a mushroom. And so even if
well, we did say mushroom, and then we said brittle cap mushroom and inky mushroom and whatever they all were that I don't remember. Well, part of this is also, if you go to, I could probably get the undergraduates to do 50 of these problems all with words. And I don't think I'm going to get the high school students to do that, to pay attention to this without something for them to look at that's going to engage their interest. So some of this with the college students is driven by wanting to do this with the high school students as well. I'm cutting off questions for a second because I would like to get to the conclusions before everybody runs away. And I'll go through it pretty quickly, and then I'm happy to answer more questions. I started out by saying that we had 4 goals in doing this research, and so I just want to quickly go through them and make a few comments. So our first goal was to try to bring tree thinking inference research more in line with cognitive science inference research. And the main point that I want to make is that we were able to successfully meld these two, to take the standard cognitive science kind of inference task and impose a tree thinking component on top of it, and subjects were able to make use of the information. They were, at least in some circumstances, able to integrate that information, especially with the tree condition. And I know that we successfully melded these two perspectives, two approaches to studying categorical inference, because we did find some of the standard typicality effects, although ours are somewhat different in some respects, but we did find the standard typicality effects. We also found interpretable effects of providing information about evolutionary relationship. Our second goal was to try to learn something about the conditions under which students can use information about evolutionary relationship to override faulty baseline knowledge that they might have. And we found that there are 3 conditions that seem to help students. One is we provide the evolutionary relationship information in the tree format. A second is that they actually have some prior background in biology. And third is that we use, for lack of a better word, favorable taxa. So they did better with certain kinds of taxa, particularly ones that are atypical for the category. A third goal was to provide a clearer test of cladogram format effects. And as I said before, we did this by using the simplest cladogram structure possible. And using the simplest structure possible, we found very clearly that college students have difficulty understanding this ladder format. Even when it's only 3 tags, it's really, really simple. You can't get anything simpler. They still have difficulty. So if you look at the stronger background subjects, they did better in the ladder condition than in the baseline condition, but they did better still in the tree condition. And in the ladder condition, even though they were better than baseline, they were still, on average, incorrect. They were making the wrong inference. The weaker background students did the same in the ladder condition as the baseline condition. We showed in some of our previous research that I talked about a couple years ago that one reason for the poor performance with the ladder diagram has to do with the Gestalt principle of good continuation. We're also exploring in some other research other factors that may affect misunderstanding of the ladder. The point here is that all of these, whatever these principles are that are making people have a difficulty understanding the ladder, they apply even with these really, really simple ladders. And then finally, we were interested in determining how students understand and reason from cladograms as a basis for informing decisions about curriculum. And I'll leave you just with 2 conclusions here. One, clearly the tree format only should be used at least until upper level biology classes. You do need to introduce it in upper level biology classes for biology majors, because even though the tree format is more common in the biology literature than the ladder format, you do see both formats. So if you have students who are reading primary literature, they're going to have to understand the ladder format. When you introduce instruction with the ladders, I think that students are going to need really detailed step-by-step instruction on how to parse the ladders. How do you draw the breaks? Where are the different hierarchical levels? And they're going to need practice in translating between those formats. So let me end by acknowledging first my grant from IES, which funded all of this research. John Coley at Northeastern, who gave us all the filler trials. Randy Neff, who's our biology teacher consultant in North Carolina. And a whole slew of RAs who created stimulus pages and collected data and entered data and checked data entry and stuff like that. Thank you.
Is there another format that you could come up with that would be better than the...
There's another format that's occasionally used that I think is even worse than the latter, but it's so occasionally used that there's really no point in doing.
Coming up with something just better.
Well, what's wrong with the tree? I mean, they understand.
Well, I mean, it's still hard.
Well, I think at this point, what's hard is that they don't, for the students who haven't had any instruction in tree thinking, they're seeing this information and they understand about trees in general. I mean, actually, there's work showing that even 7-year-olds understand hierarchical trees. By 9, they're at ceiling for 4-level hierarchy. So I think the understanding the tree structure is pretty easy, but there is still some content about, well, why is it that mammals and reptiles are linked, and what does that mean, and why is that important? And we didn't, except in experiment 2 where they had the phylogenetics instruction, we didn't do any of that.
So this was an abstract experiment with abstract information. You might
Well, it's not.
time, actually, that these categories.
I don't know what you mean by abstract information.
Okay,
I mean,
noise and more numbers, you know, this species
you're
number X and species number.
so you're I don't understand. You're suggesting that we do that, or?
No, I'm suggesting that they might have an easier time with the trees if the information there wasn't something that they reason about in other ways too.
Right, and so I mean, one thing that we can do that we haven't, because it's such a pain to unpack all the data, is I don't know that they necessarily have these kinds of misconceptions about the filler problems. Although there are manipulations that John Coley built into the filler problem, so I'm not sure whether that would be an appropriate background. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if we had given them, well, let's say information about 3 different kinds of snakes, let's say, so they know nothing, they would do better because they would perform at chance instead of being
But they might still use
without the clade.
surface properties of the pictures to make their judgment.
Yeah, I mean, we could create problems for which, in the baseline condition, they would be at chance. I'm not sure necessarily what that's going to tell us. I presume that then they do better, that in absolute value, they do better in the tree condition than they did here. I care more, at this point, I care more about the differences than about the absolute level of performance. I presume I can move that around by changing my stimuli.
What about recommending dropping ladders altogether? I mean, I bet that experts in this field have a harder time with ladders than trees.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I probably personally, as a cognitive psychologist, I would say that my suggestion to teach the ladders in upper level classes is driven solely by the fact that these diagrams are there in the primary literature, which means the students do need to understand them. I think they should be deleted from the primary literature too, but I can't make that happen. You know, my colleague Kevin personally prefers ladders. I mean, he doesn't use them when he teaches anymore, but for whatever reason, I don't know if that's because that's what he learned or, you do have to draw fewer lines to draw them for sure. But I've been working with these ladders now for, I don't know, 5 years or something, and I'm flawless at getting the structure, but it's still harder for me with the ladders and the trees, and I wasn't doing either one of them until 5 years ago. So, I think it's really, really hard to overcome the perceptual aspects. We have some ideas of how to do that we're testing in some experiments for which I don't have the data analyzed yet. But yeah, I mean, I would get rid of them, but I can't make that happen.
How much do these inferences being correct or not kind of require an understanding that for the case of enzymes, it's going to be tightly coupled with the genetics? Whereas if you took into account the niche and behavioral characteristics that...
So we do know from the categorical inference literature, from a bunch of work by John Coley, and some other people as well, that students make inferences based on categorical relationships for enzymes. They do not make categorical inferences necessarily for other kinds of properties, but they do for enzymes and some other things. Enzymes were just easy for us to use. So we're relying on the fact that students naturally make categorical inferences for enzymes. So presumably they do that in the baseline condition in our experiment as well.
Like saying it has a particular gene.
So they've used enzymes, they've used genes, they've used body parts. All of those yield categorical inferences. We could have used any of them, except for the body parts. Since I'm working with an evolutionary biologist, we'd have to have real ones, and then they'd be hard to find. So at least more expert subjects, do not make categorical inferences for diseases, although novice subjects will make categorical inferences for diseases. And you can also switch around what kind of inferences you make based on what kind of properties and what kind of animals. So if you have animals that live in an aquatic habitat, they'll pay more attention to, you've got those two together. You've got the whale and the fish or something, so that's salient. Then they'll make one set of inferences if you give them a habitat kind of characteristic, and a different set of inferences if you give a body part kind of inference. And if you have animals that look the same, then it switches. And we didn't want to get into that. I mean, we wanted people to make categorical inferences, so we picked enzymes specifically for that reason. All right, thank you.